Okay, so after computing some descriptive statistics, the next video is going to talk about some very basic graphing techniques. So as always, we'll set our working directory. We'll load up the read.excel package so that we can load in our dataset, which I've renamed res just to make it shorter. And we also need to make sure that group is treated as a factor because we're going to break the graphs up by this factor. So the main package we're going to use here is ggplot2, which is part of the tidyverse package. So the main call we use is ggplot, the name of the dataset, and then AES, which stands for aesthetics, and this is where we specify the x and the y values. So on the x-axis, I'd like to have group, and on the y, I'd like to have time1rec, or time1 vocabulary. Let's run that. Okay, and here we have a blank graph, but we can see our axes, and these have been correctly specified. Okay, so let's build on this. I'll copy and paste this, and to add to this graph, you just use the addition symbol, and we'll go on to the next line just to make it readable. So we'd like a bar chart, but we don't want a bar illustrating the sum or the count of these variables, but we want the mean. So we'll use stat_summary. Function of y is mean. We want the mean on the y-axis. The geom, which is the graphing element, is a bar. We want a bar chart. Okay, and if we Control-Enter to run that, here we'll see we've got our bar chart. Okay, this is still quite basic, and there are a couple of things we can change. So first of all, if we don't want the color to be so dark, we can specify fill. So let's say fill, let's go for dark gray. Okay, and to make them pop out a little bit against the background, we can specify color, and we'll just use black. Okay, great. So what if we want to add some error bars to the top? Well, again, we'll copy and paste this, and we'll keep adding to it. So again, we're going to use stat_summary, but this time to specify a 95% confidence interval displayed on each bar. I can never remember the syntax for this, so I'm going to shamelessly copy and paste it. So we're using stat_summary. Function of the data is mean CL normal. Our geom is error bar, so not just bar this time. And we can also specify the width. So let's run this and see what we get. Okay, so here we have our bars illustrated at the top. And of course, if you don't like this, if it's too wide or it's not wide enough, you can change this using the width argument. Okay, this graph is looking good, but we can make it a lot clearer if we specify our labels a bit more. So again, we'll copy and paste this, and we'll keep building on it. So we can add a title using ggtitle. And we just put the name in here, so let's say time1 vocabulary by group. We can also specify custom labels for the x and y axis. So xlab is group. We already have group, that's fine. And then we can change the y axis. ylab, we'll call that vocabulary. And we can run that. Okay. So this just makes it a little bit more easy to read. Another thing we can change is the group labels here. So 1 and 2 is fine for us if we know what that means, but we might want it to display with a text string instead. So again, we can add to this, and I can never remember the syntax for this either. So we're going to use scale x discrete. So we're talking about the scale of the x-axis. It's a discrete scale, it's 1 or 2, it's a factor, it's not numeric. Our breaks, as they exist currently, are the numbers 1 and 2, but the labels we'd like to use are mono and EAL. So Control-Enter to run this, and then we have our custom labels along the bottom. Do bear in mind as well that you can change colors to different things, so I've used dark gray and black for the colors here, but if you look up a list of permissible colors in ggplot2, you'll have a range of other options. Okay, we can also produce a boxplot, so I'll just do this very briefly. So ggplot, same as above, res, AES, group on the x-axis, and time1rec on the y-axis, and now it's a lot simpler. We just specify boxplot, and we can run that. And that will give us a beautiful box plot on the right. And again, don't forget that all of these are interchangeable, so you can add these to this graph as well. So if I want to change the scale on X, if I want to change the labels, I can do that. Just add that here, we run that again, and it gives us the labels as before. Okay, another common graph you might have to create is a scatterplot. So again, we'll use the same syntax to start with, and I can just copy and paste this from above. So instead of looking at a factor variable, we're going to look at the relationship between two numeric variables. And again, we can use str on our dataset if we can't remember how the variables are being treated. So let's look at time 1 receptive and expressive. These are both numeric. So I'm going to change this up here to time 1 expressive. Okay. Now, the geom we need for this is geom point. So again, this is a bit easier than the box plot. So again, this is a bit easier than the bar chart example. So geom point, and let's have a look at what we get. Okay, so here we see all the points plotted for time 1 expressive and time 1 receptive, and it looks like there's a positive relationship there. We can actually add a line of best fit, which will help us to determine if this is the case. So we'll build on this again, and we'll do geom smooth. And the method we want is lm for basically a linear line of best fit. And if we run that, it's plotted our line of best fit for us. Another option here is to specify SE false if you don't want the confidence interval of the slope. And this will just give you a blue line like this. Okay, one final thing to mention is that it's possible to break up a graph according to the values of a factor that you have. So let's say that I would like to recreate this scatter plot, but separately for each of my two groups. So how do I do that? Well, there are different ways to do it, but one very quick way is if we copy and paste this from above, we can add an argument at the bottom, which is facet underscore grid. And the syntax of this is dot, so a dot just means whatever you had there before, and then tilde, which means as a function by group, as a function of group. So now we're just saying do this above as you would normally, but now split it into two separate parts according to group status. So we'll have a separate one for group 1 and a separate one for group 2. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so here we have the two separate panels, group 1 and group 2, and the separate points plotted for each one. And also, each one has its own line of best fit as well, because whatever happens in the main call here will just be replicated for each group separately, according to facet grid. Okay, and so those are some very basic graphing techniques in R to get you started.